Mr. President, Ray McGovern is here to brief you.
Hi,
Morning,
Ray.
Mr. President.
Hey, Ray. What about this thing in the news and Trump on a golf course, and this guy has written some book saying he's pro-Ukrainian? What's all this about? You got anything on it?
Well, it's really complicated, Mr. President. I wish that the next assassination attempt was by somebody who had no connections with the deep state or with Ukraine or with recruiting fighters for Ukraine. The name of this book, which I have printed out here, uh, Ukraine's Unwinnable War: The Fatal Flaw of Democracy, World Abandonment, and the Global Citizen, Taiwan, Afghanistan, North Korea, and the End of Humanity. Okay, this is a long review in Amazon of a book that this fellow wrote. Now, you try to read this thing, you try to understand it. It's really hard to understand. And as the news keeps coming in and we learn about things like this book, it's really hard to kind of discern what's really going on here, how this guy got there, why he was there for, I think it's 20 hours now before he was seen. It's just full of questions and complicated questions. So we'll keep you updated on this, Mr. President. I'm sure the FBI and the Secret Service is doing the same thing, but my God, this is the second attempt. One wonders whether there will be a third that will be more successful.
Well, that's a tragedy for this country,
It is.
and a tragedy, and you guys got to make sure this doesn't ever succeed. You got to make sure of that. And but let me ask you, this is like another Who Lost China that we had when they, before the Korean War, right? Who and on Ukraine. And there's that
Yeah.
article in the Washington Post, that saying now there's, yeah, a lot of people being killed in Ukraine. What was it all about? They say I got to unleash long range weapons, but I can't risk nuclear war. I mean, what are they talking about? What the Washington Post wants me to go to war with risk nukes,
Well,
long
Mr.
range?
President, yeah, I'd like to discuss that article with you. Before I forget, though, I need to update you on the killing of Asenor Ag, the young American woman who was killed by a sniper bullet from an Israeli sharpshooter about a week ago. Now, you told a press gaggle that you were told that it was a ricochet. I haven't been able to get anybody to accept the logic of that. The autopsy shows that she was shot in a lateral trajectory. The people there all testified to what they saw, and some were right next to her. Um, it was 30 minutes after the disturbance near this very village, and the shot came from 230 yards away from where she had been standing. So we're interested, or our intelligence folks are interested in how you got that information. Who told you that it was a ricochet? Because that's ballistically and by all the other evidence virtually impossible. Can you share that with us? Who told you that it was a ricochet?
I don't remember. I remember something that the sharpshooter was aiming at the person standing next to her or something.
Mm.
Wasn't that?
Mhm.
Uh, but is this the fog of war? But why are they shooting? The demonstrators were violent, right? Were threatening. Otherwise, why you would shoot into a demonstration?
No, that had subsided for a whole half hour, as I told you originally, and I
Well,
was.
what is Netanyahu? Why are they questioning me? I'm not running charging the IDF or anything. What does Netanyahu say? What is he doing? Why
Well,
is
of
he
course.
shooting
Well,
up people in a demonstration, and particularly an American citizen? That look, I mean, what are we supposed to do about that? You can't kill an American citizen when I'm complaining about Hamas killing an American citizen. That's the whole campaign here. They right, their night of terror killed Americans. So that gives us a direct involvement. What is the IDF doing? They're trying to embarrass me, get me committed even more.
you can put your finger on it, Mr. President. they would like very much to get you committed even more. I'm not saying the IDF here, I'm talking about Netanyahu. Life is cheap. And this is the second American that was shot through the head. One was a journalist, actually, back 2 years ago, July, I think it was. Uh, Aclay was her last name. And so, yeah, they show that they really can do these things. And I'm afraid that when they hear you say that, oh, it was a ricochet, they are they are confirmed in their attitude that they can get away with murder, to use an expression that actually obtains here. So, yeah, unless there's a real investigation of this, Tony Blinken says, oh, well, the Israelis are looking into this. They're going to investigate. The UN says, no, let us investigate. No, no, you can't do that. The Israelis going to investigate. This is the same way as it always works out. Unless you say, look, this enough of this. She's an American citizen. That means something. But if a ricochet is what somebody told you, and you repeat that to the press, well, the Israelis are not going to take you very seriously. I'm sorry to say. Now we can move on to Ukraine, as you mentioned before, because that's the real meat of the question here. Unless you have questions about about
Well, we
HU.
gotta. I think this is very disturbing. First of all, you keep forgetting we do have this election, and I got to save democracy from, from this. Let's call him a fascist, Trump, and he doesn't. I mean, that's the greatest threat we've ever had to our democracy. Is that guy? So, but on the other hand, you got all those Arab voters in Michigan, a place like that, and on the other hand, it bothers me. It bothers me. I don't know. Israelis, are they out of control? I mean, be honest with me. Is Netanyahu going to listen to anything I say? Uh, I can't cut off the weapons. I can't turn them in because you know how politics works here. So is he out to just destroy me and bring in Trump, or what's going on?
In all due candor and with due respect, Netanyahu doesn't give a rat's patootie about you. As long as his premise is the same as your premise, namely that you can't do anything other than what you're doing, namely staying silent about these things until the election comes at least, this is just going to continue. In other words, Netanyahu really feels that, as he said, actually on a tape recorded thing that he didn't realize being recorded. He said, "Oh, the Americans, they can always be bent to our will. As a matter of fact, 80% of the Americans support us. Absurd." His words. Well, maybe it's 70% now, but it's 80% Israelis support him. That's the fly in the ointment.
All right, so we can't do anything about Israel.
Well,
And
with
Kamala's handling it well because she puts in there she favors a two-state solution and she cares about the Palestinians. So but they'll have a two-state. I mean, it'll be tiny, a tiny state, and but it'll be better than nothing, right? And then they can't
well,
say we
now,
support
Mr. President,
genocide because any kind of small, what do you call them, Bantu stand or something? What are this South Africa?
Bantustan, yeah,
Yeah,
the
they used
little
to have that. A little,
enclaves, yeah. Well,
yeah,
Mr.
yeah, a little.
President, let me put a little dose of what we consider to be reality with our analysis section, and that is that Netanyahu is never going to want a two-state solution. He's never going to want any kind of freedom for the Palestinians. What he's going to want is to exterminate them, and that's precisely what he's doing. Now, if the major premise that you and Kamala, I mean Vice President Harris, and Netanyahu, if it's the same major premise that you can't do anything about it, the slaughter will continue. That's our position. The only person that stop it is you. I'm looking at you, and that's our view. And it's not impossible because the Israeli army, as I've told you before, would really welcome the U.S. saying, look, we're not going to support a wider war because the Israeli army, the last thing we want after being pretty much defeated in Gaza by Hamas, the last thing they want is a major war with Hezbollah or anything else. So let's go to Ukraine.
What do you mean defeated by Hamas? I never heard that one before.
Well,
They're in
Hamas has
control.
they have not defeated Hamas. That was their objective. And so one can look at it as a Hamas a
But
victory
they
of
need
sorts.
Hamas, right? Come on. They need Hamas. They need an enemy. They need Hamas. What are they going to do? If Hamas went out of business, so what are they going to do? Turn Gaza into a tourist attraction? Or they don't want that. They don't want they. I mean, they want that, but they don't want to get rid of them. And then what are they going to do with the West Bank? They're not going to have a Palestinian state there. So have this uneasy situation. But let me say what we got to do is stress, take attention away from this Israel Gaza thing, which is a no win for us, and talk about preserving freedom against China, against Russia, the Ukraine. That was the good war we had there, and that's not going well. And the people say now is I got to threaten nukes, or they're going to bring nukes, and we're going to long range weapons. And so tell me about that, and let's wrap this up
I
sooner than
will.
later,
Yeah.
because we tend to go on here, and I
Okay.
fall into sleep here a little. So, you know,
Let me talk about Ukraine, Mr. President, because that should be the focus of our activities this morning. Um, there's an opinion piece by David Ignatius, who is so well plugged in that some people consider him to be the
but that's
spokesman.
that Washington Post piece.
That's correct. Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
he's
Yeah,
their
he
celebrated
wants me to give them
column.
long range weapons. Otherwise, I'm responsible for all
Yeah,
the casualties. Because he went and saw casualties. There's a lot of them. It tears me up,
that's
and
right.
uh, and, uh, even though they're not American citizens, casualties, and they're fighting for freedom. And he's saying that I abandoned them, right?
Well, he's saying, let me take us through here because it's really quite amazing how he's constructed this. The title is Ukraine is bleeding out. It cannot fight forever. My first thought was saying, my God, reality has struck David Ignatius, and his tutors have permitted him to say this. It must mean that they're realizing that Ukraine can't win. But I was deceived in thinking that. Max, do you have that photo that is on the top of this article? Let me show that. Okay, so David Ignatius was in Kiev a week ago, and he talked to a lot of wounded warriors and people who were really saying, this is a terrible thing going on. And he says, listening to their stories, says David Ignatius, you really realize that Ukraine is bleeding out. Its will to fight is as strong as ever, but its army is exhausted. Wow. So I'm thinking, ergo, now the ergo that I expected would have been, therefore, we have to figure out something else other than to try to up the ante here because we're not winning. But no, here's the ergo here. The rubric of support for as long as it takes doesn't match the reality of the conflict. That's the lesson I take from this. We have to increase the firepower of Ukraine so that we can force the Vladimir Putin to settle on equal terms. Well, that is illusion. That is really crazy at this point. The more so since you and your Pentagon, at least, decided on Friday the 13th, for whatever that's worth, that you were not going to approve the use of long range missiles to hit deep into Russia and stir up trouble in that way. That was Friday. Thursday, you'll remember, Putin warned that this could lead to a wider war. Now, that is, those of us who look at these things, were reassured that there was an adult in your room And sure enough, we heard. Now, we heard this not from US media, we heard this from TASS, Soviet media, Soviet, Russian media. And this is what TASS said. The US Department of Defense believes that no type of weapon will become a game changer. Okay. Secretary Pat Ryder, the spokesman, said, Austin himself said, there's no silver bullet. No silver bullet's going to enable Ukraine to succeed. Uh, Ukraine should focus on employing capabilities currently already at their disposal, says the Pentagon spokesman. And that gets them a stronger hand to go to negotiations. Now, that was just an hour or two before Prime Minister Starmer arrived at your doorstep. And as you know better than anyone, you resisted his plea, for whatever reason, to enable his missiles to strike deep into Russia. They can't strike into deep into Russia without the technology that is proprietary that we own. Okay, the Russians know that. So, if it was the Defense Department,
Explain that to me. What do you
well,
mean?
they have these.
They got the missiles. They can strike. No.
No, this is a good question, Mr. President. These Storm Shadow missiles, okay, they have guidance systems depending on GPS. Now, GPS is consistently jammed by Russian electronic jamming. And so the US has a special package they put on this thing to avoid that, to let it get around, and have decoys to make sure that the missile gets through. That's proprietary. That can't be used without US approval. The Kremlin knows that. Starmer knows that. And when he went back, he said, oh, they won't let me use it, but we'll keep trying. And here, Ignatius, who speaks for the CIA and for the Victoria Nulands and such stripe in our government, is still saying, oh, let's pick up on what he says here. Well, yeah. He was at a conference in Kiev, okay? The conference arranger was something that was created when Victoria Nuland was spending $5 billion, count them B with a B, $5 billion on Ukraine's aspirations to join the West. Okay, and this procession of speeches says Ignatius says don't stop worrying about the dangers of escalation, for God's sake. And I came away, says Ignatius, I came away being sure that we should take the risks to help Ukraine. It really matters how this war ends. If Putin prevails, it will harm the interests of America and Europe for decades. Wow. And then he quotes you, or he quotes Jake Sullivan. I have no announcement to make on the long range missile process. Now, Ignatius is saying, look, the Russians are bluffing here. Don't believe them. And curiously enough, a former ambassador, UK ambassador to the US, who also was a national security advisor to the British government, said, yeah, Putin is bluffing, and he's bluffing until he's not bluffing. What happens when he's not bluffing? So, all I can say is that the world was surprised when your people, in the form of the Pentagon, and then you yourself told Starmer, look, no announcement on this. We're going to talk about this maybe later in the month here at the UN or when Zelensky comes. And with respect to Zelensky, I really have to tell you that he gave this big, long interview to Fareed Zakaria. You may have been briefed on this, but in case not, there were two really important things about it. Now, that was 8 days ago, before either Fareed or Zelensky knew about your wise decision not to authorize these deep strikes into Russia. And so he's saying, we really need this, we really need this, because, and he says, because Russian shells outnumber shells in artillery and so forth 12 to 1. For every one shell we shoot, the Russians can fire 12. And besides that, 80% of our electrical capacity is demolished already. 80%. So that's from Zelensky. Okay. Those are two really things that sort of cry out for. Is that the case? 80%? We haven't thought it was that high, but that's Zelensky. It is a 12 to 1. My God, you know? So he's
Ray,
in bad shape.
Ray, it's important. I said we're in for the long haul. I'm out of here in what, 4 months now. Take me through 4 months. I there's no one has a legacy if I get nuclear war. So tell me what the real risks are here.
Okay. Well, the real risks have been faced, and you've faced them down, Mr. President. Whether you heard what this UK former ambassador to the US said, namely that Putin is bluffing until he's not bluffing, whether you
No, but
piece that
tell me, because I'm the guy that's going to wake up at 3 in the morning.
right,
I've read the whole thing about Kennedy and Khrushchev. I think a couple of hundred times, a lot of it recently. So, and I may not be as sharp as some people in the media want me to be. I know what nuclear war would bring. I know it's the end. So, and I know Russia's, they're not going to. We had all those discussions. I was at all those briefings. If you don't get the first strike, there is no second strike, or how is the triad working, and how much time do you have, and so if they think some of this stuff is hitting their vital defense and intelligence apparatus, controlling their ability to respond to a first strike or whatever it is, or it is the big first strike. Uh, so take me to 3 o'clock in the morning.
sure,
Uh, what happens? What happens? And don't give me the other stuff, because that's the ball game.
okay.
Ball game. And what the hell does the Washington Post now? Kay Graham, she wouldn't have had a thing like that urging the president to risk nuclear war. Is this Amazon? Is that Jeff Bezos? Is that does Amazon? Are they threatened by Russia,
Well,
Chinese? I don't know what's going on. I don't even know who these people are anymore.
well,
What's
David
happening?
Ignatius has a reputation for repeating the hardest line elements of your government. Now, that includes the deep state, CIA, FBI, and so forth. It also has included the Defense Department, but apparently he didn't listen to the Defense Department this time. Let me take you through that 3 a.m. call. Let's say the British, for whatever reason, decide to shoot up some early warning, strategic early warning sites in Russia. And let's say they succeed. You get a call at 3 o'clock. You have a call here from Putin. Will you accept it? Now, you haven't talked to Putin, well, since the 30th of December, 2021. Okay. What are you going to say? What are you going to say to him? Well, that's the problem here, because Putin is not going to countenance fooling around with his early warning radars that detect the ballistic missiles and the submarine launched ballistic missiles that we could fire at him. So that's what you're trying to avoid. And I dare say your courageous decision in allowing the Pentagon to speak some sense into Tony Blinken. After all, he was very much for approving these. It was very clear. He and the foreign secretary of Britain went to Kiev, and they all but promised Zelensky that they would send them these ATACMS and worse missiles, and that they could do what they want well into the Russian interior. So what I'm saying here, Mr. President, is that David Ignatius and the British are still rattling the cages, saying we have to have permission to strike Russia deep into its interior, even though on Friday the 13th, you and the Pentagon said, no, that's not going to happen. We'll revisit it at the end of the month when people come for the UN. So all I'm saying is that it seems we have some respite because some of your people took seriously the warning from Putin, and actually, your guy, we call him Baghdad Bob, but what's his name? John Kirby. Okay, he said he's your spokesman, and he said we are taking seriously the warning of the Russian president. Whoa! Well, I think I applaud him for doing that because, you know, the way things are going in Ukraine, it's just a matter of time before it's very clear that Ukraine has lost definitively. That could happen before the election, as I've said to you many times. It's certainly going to happen before you leave in 4 months. So I'm glad that you're taking that into account. Part of what that Pentagon spokesman said is, okay, look, just think about negotiations, would you please? Negotiations are possible. That's the only way out of this as we see it. And we would recommend that this first step, avoiding deepening the war, be accompanied by some outreach, if not by you, then by Defense Secretary Austin, who is in touch with his opposite number, Belousov, in Moscow. This is a salutary thing. During Cuba, we had contact. Now we also have one tenuous contact. No one will speak to Blinken, but Austin has this contact with Belousov, and they have already worked that to avoid worse.
You know, it's funny. I don't know, funny. I thought big thing in this election when I was going to win, and this is before I thought that Israel. I think Netanyahu's cut me off at the knees. The Democrats, I think he has that cheering crowd of Republicans. I think he's just out to embarrass us and get his whole loaf. He wants everything. You know, he doesn't want to call it genocide, but even so, he wants to eliminate the Palestinians as a people. You know, and I've been around a lot. You know, there's no way you do that without it being considered genocide. I mean, that's what it means. But you know, they want to do it slow, but they want to do it. And I don't think the two-state thing is in any way going to satisfy anybody. But I thought I would run on Ukraine fighting freedom and that Trump's a stooge of Putin, so he's not willing to do it. But Trump's, you know, he's a liar. He's a demagogue. He'll say anything, you know. So I push him on that. He'll say, hey, are you kidding me? I'll blow the Russians up and there'll be no more. And he'll say anything. He has no governor, no restraint. So that one's not working. Besides, we're not getting the victory, right? We're getting another one of these endless wars. So I want to
That's
wrap
right.
this up. I want to wrap this up, Ray.
Okay.
But this is look the main thing, Ray. We can't have nuclear war. I mean, that's the virtue of being old. These younger people may not remember how scared everybody in the world was. Well, these armaments are more destructive than ever. These weapons and their means of delivery are harder to block, more varied. It's amazing all the damage these damn drones are doing. Imagine what a couple of these nukes would do. I mean, there's no goodbye Chicago or something, wherever they're going to hit first. All right.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now, Mr. President, you should know that just yesterday, Peskov, the Putin's spokesperson, Kremlin spokesperson, he was asked, "Well, can you flesh out what the threats from Putin were about responding appropriately to war with NATO?" And he said, "Well, not now. Maybe later. But you should realize that Mr. Putin is very circumspect, very deliberate, very deliberate. Do you hear that? Very deliberate. Now, Mr. President, he is okay, and what he has left open is Odessa. He has 2 years ago said, look, Odessa, that could be what do you call it, a bone of contention, like a, an apple of discord. Yeah, a jablka grazdora, an apple of discord, or it could be a way to work out things so the Ukraine could have some semblance of territorial integrity. Now, there are all kinds of things to negotiate on. Uh, that is the avenue, and if I'm not thinking about any election here. I'm thinking about what's going to happen between now and the election, and you have a choice. There's one choice that's open to you. It's really open to Putin as well. He has said, look, we don't want an open war. We don't want World War III. What we do want is kind of negotiations that sensible people could come together, look at the situation on the ground, and talk. That is possible before the election, in our view.
Yeah, but that article you mentioned, the Washington Post. I looked at that. You, this happens at every war. You get a lot of people killed on both sides, and you don't just turn off that feeling. And those people that he interviewed, they've lost, arms, legs, part of their brain. There's a lot of damage on both sides. And I don't know how the hell Nixon did it. Went to China, ended that, tension, ended, but we didn't care about the South Vietnamese who were both people. We didn't care about all that. But I don't see peace there now in the Ukraine. And I'm committed to the long haul. And the long haul, this war can go on year after year. And what you do know is they hate each other now. Those Russians and the Ukrainians in the way they more than they ever did before. How do you put that back, Ray?
The
That's what.
soldiers do. The soldiers do. And there is a great portion of the population in the western part of Ukraine who also do. But these things can be negotiated. After all, there was Korea, right? There was Vietnam. Everything ends in some sort of negotiations. And when when Ignatius himself, David Ignatius, spokesperson for the deep state, says supporting Ukraine, quote, as long as it takes, quote, does not match the reality of this conflict. Well, that's true. And I thought that he was going to draw the appropriate conclusion. He draws just the opposite conclusion. You can draw the right one. And, you could go to the Vatican City, and meet Putin there and talk about this stuff before the election and sort of tamp this thing down before it gets completely out of hand. Because although your military has stepped in and tamped things down, God knows what the Ukrainians, what the British, what the Polish might do. Last thought here: when Vice President Harris says, "Oh, Putin's not going to stop there. Putin, next thing is Poland," and Poland. There are 800,000 people of Polish extraction in Pennsylvania. What are they going to feel about that? Well, Mr. President, I just remind you that I would say that that's cynical, because that's exactly what Bill Clinton did in 1996 when he was running against Bob Dole, and Bob Dole was running pretty well in the Midwest in those battleground states, right? And Bill Clinton said, "Well, let's get Poland and the others into NATO." And he was told, "Well, we promised not to do that." That promise. We'll do it. And they did it. Did he win the election? He won the election. Was he helped by this? Yes, he was. So this is Harris doing exactly the same thing, irrespective of the strategic implications here. And Poland is not next, because as you probably know, Victoria Nuland herself has admitted that it was she and others that put the kibosh on ending the war 6 weeks after it started, when she and Boris Johnson said, no, no, let's keep fighting, when an agreement had already been reached by Zelensky's and by Putin's negotiators in Istanbul. So The Russians stopped there, as you know, Mr. President. It's if they stopped there, then the burden of proof on their going into Poland or the Baltics or the English Channel, the burden of proof is on those who claim that, and and responsible people who are somewhat educated recognize that to be an idle concern.
Oh, it's idle concern. I still think about 3 o'clock in the morning. Uh, and let me add last question. Let's see. Let's. Uh, how scary are these nuclear weapons? I mean, would it stop with a small one? Would it stop? I mean, you know, it's the same thing we had with Mao, but Mao was a crazy man, I think, compared to Putin, or and then at least he was a communist, and they're kind of crazy worldview. Uh, it's funny. Here's Trump blasting Kamala's father's a Marxist. Not all Marxists are the same. I mean, anyway, I don't know about that. But the thing is, uh, what about? I mean, these nuclear weapons. Now they're small, right? They're small, so and you could survive. I mean, even if a mistake is made, right? Then people would realize. And I mean, what does it mean to unleash a nuclear weapon? I don't know. It
Mr. Pre-
used to be you thought it's the end of everything, right?
Mr. President, there has been talk along those lines, even by some of our leading naval and other army officials. But you know what Gorbachev and Reagan said, there can be no winners in a nuclear war, and that obtains to today. That's why we're also concerned about this. That's why we welcomed your decision not to give permission for those storm shadows from the UK to go deep inside Russia, despite Putin's warning. Now, the reality is that Putin is very afraid that you're Blinken, you're Sullivan, faced with an abject defeat in Ukraine, might go to one of these admirals or generals and say, "How about just one of these low yield? That's it, low yield, half of what Hiroshima or Nagasaki did. Just drop one of those, and sure, the Russians will stop right then." What do you think? He's afraid of that. And that's why he keeps saying, "Look, we have them too. We have exercised them. We have them in Belarus. We have exercised them with Belarus." So what he's trying to do is say, "Look, Mr. President and Mr. Blinken and Mr. Sullivan, don't even think about it," because he's very worried that your only option, besides going to sensible negotiations, is to raise the ante even beyond the TACMs or HIMARS or Storm Shadows or whatever, and threaten nuclear weapons before the election, so that Ukraine doesn't lose, so that you and Kamala don't lose, and so that they don't lose their freedom, because if that other fellow comes in, well, he has the book on him. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, or if we could scare Putin and he has to back down, that would Kamala would win. That's a possibility. Scare him. What was that Nixon had, that the madman theory? You got to show him that you're capable of being crazy. But then again, even Nixon, he stopped being crazy and he went and negotiated peace with Mao Zedong, pulled the plug on the whole thing of the Vietnam War. All right.
Mr. President, when I talk about you speaking with Putin, well, that's pretty much what happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy was in touch directly with Khrushchev. In those days, there were teletype machines, but they were directly in touch, sometimes on the phone. Okay. Now, it is a saving grace that Secretary Austin is in touch with Belousov, his counterpart in the Russian setup there, the Secretary of Minister of Defense. But there's no substitute, and I think you agree with this very very strongly, to personal contact. Now, I would remind you that the last personal contact you had with President Putin was twofold. On the 30th of December 2021, you talked to him at his request. You were in Delaware without your advisors, and he said, "Look, can you at least promise us not to put ballistic missiles, he called them offensive strike missiles, in Ukraine? Can you agree to that?" And you said yes. And so the transcript of that, or the readout, said President Biden said that the U.S. has no intention to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. 30th of January 2021. 12th of February 2022, the readout of your next and last conversation with Putin said President Biden refused to discuss whether or not offensive strike missiles would be put in Ukraine, and he refused to discuss whether Ukraine should be part of NATO. So I'm saying to you that if you were to make an overture to say, all right, let's talk again, I think Putin would get the message that, you understand that he felt conned by your undertaking back in late December 2041 not to put offensive missiles in Ukraine, and your reversal of that just 6 weeks later. I think he would say, "Oh, well, maybe what's to lose by talking?" And so, even Winston Churchill, I think, says it's better to jaw than war. I'd give it a try, Mr. President, because the alternatives are very dim indeed.
Yeah, let's call it a session. But before I had this job, I thought you get in there, you can do the right thing. You can make change, you can do it. And I feel like I got my tail caught in a mousetrap, and and all these other people, they can be doing their stuff. There's almost nothing I could do. Maybe nothing I could do about it. I just want to get out of here before the world blows up.
4 more months, Mr. President. You can do a lot of
Yeah.
good in 4 more months.
So you say.